Hello, everybody. This is Fabian Odin here, medical student. So today we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system physiology. So this is something that's always given me problems as far as cardiac output. What is cardiac output, afterload and preload? So that's what we're going to discuss and see how everything works. So I'm going to explain this diagram. This diagram represents the heart. So basically what we see as blood will come in through the right atrium via the vena cava, and it will go through the tricuspid valve, through the right ventricle, then the pulmonary valve, then go through the pulmonary trunk, pulmonary artery, then the lungs, pulmonary vein, left atrium, mitral valve, left ventricle, aortic valve, aorta, systemic arteries, then to the rest of the body, and start returning to the vena cava through the systemic veins. So one key thing to always remember is the pulmonary artery is the only artery in the body that is going to transport deoxygenated blood, and the pulmonary vein is the only vein in the body that's going to transport oxygenated blood. So let's take a look at this formula. So we see that cardiac output is equal to stroke volume times heart rate. So looking at the definition of this, cardiac output is the amount of blood ejected by each ventricle in 1 minute. Heart rate is how many beats per minute that the heart is beating, and the stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped by the ventricles with each heartbeat. So now whenever we start talking about cardiac output, we also need to know that there's 4 determinants of cardiac output. So the 4 determinants are going to be heart rate, which is again how many beats per minute, preload, so this is going to be the volume entering the ventricles. And then afterload is going to be the resistance ventricles must overcome to circulate blood. And the last one is going to be contractility. So this is how hard the myocardium has to contract for a given preload. So next we're going to look at the diagram and put these definitions with the diagram to make this a little bit more easier to remember. So next we're going to look at preload. So this is going to be volume entering the ventricles. So basically whenever the atriums contract, they're going to push blood into the ventricles. That blood that is being pushed into your ventricles at that time is going to be your preload. So things that can affect your preload is venous return. So if you don't have enough blood returning back to the right side of the heart, you're not going to have enough blood to fill those ventricles. If you don't have enough blood in your system, for example, hypovolemic shock, you're not going to have enough blood to fill those ventricles, and so you're going to have a decreased preload. And the other thing to think about is the contractility of the atrium. So if the atrium is barely contracting, you're not going to be able to push blood into the ventricles. Therefore, it will affect your preload. So next we're going to talk about afterload. So resistance, the ventricles must overcome to circulate blood. So if we look at this example, we see that the aorta has a pressure of 85 millimeters of mercury. So that 85 millimeters of mercury in the aorta is keeping the aortic valve closed. So to be able to push blood through the aorta and through the rest of the body, we must have a pressure in the left ventricle greater than 85. So if we see that the left ventricle has a pressure of 100 millimeters of mercury, of course that's greater than 85, so that pressure whenever the ventricles contract is going to be able to push blood through the aorta and through the body for circulation. The same concept is the same for the pulmonary trunk. So the pulmonary trunk, the pressure is around 25 millimeters of mercury. So that 25 millimeters of mercury in the pulmonary trunk is keeping that pulmonary valve closed. So to be able to circulate blood into the pulmonary system, the right ventricle must have a pressure of greater than 25 whenever the right ventricle contracts to be able to push blood through the pulmonary trunk. So if there was a pressure in the right ventricle of 28, that pressure is going to be able to push open that pulmonary valve and push blood through the pulmonary system. So that's the basics of pulmonary physiology.